And we are live? Question mark? Yes. Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. We are here to talk about the story, or the Chronicles, I should say, of Actaeon, which is the engineer and the upcoming release of the Dark Heart of Redemption with the author Darran Handshaw. Darran, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Hello, everyone, and Andrew, thanks so much for having me. Glad to chat with you again about everything, and you know, was looking forward to this for a while. So I'm the author of The Engineer and the Chronicles of Actaeon, and I started out writing The Engineer basically as a slow paced. I wanted to finish a novel, and this was a story that was just really important to me, with an important personal story that I had started writing a few times beforehand, different books, and didn't really. Oh, howdy, Ralph. Um, didn't really stick with it. Wasn't as invested in the story, and with this one, it was one that I was really invested in. So I started the long process of writing a gigantic book once a week, with one writing session a week, which took a very long time. In addition to my job as a full-time uh, mechanical R&D engineer, and also working as a volunteer in the fire department, and now actually being a fire chief in charge of the fire department. So it's been a passion of mine to want to write the book and to make time to write amongst all of those other things, and also having you know a 6-year-old son at home. And actually, when I started writing The Engineer, he was a newborn, um, and I
Yeah, because
wrote
it
sometimes
came out
with
in
him.
2017, right?
Yeah. So he was born in 2016, and so I wrote sometimes with a little baby strapped to my chest. So
That's very good. Yeah.
yeah,
It's funny because you're very tied to the history of my channel. Raul, who's here in the live show, I think that was the first live show, or at least the very first group panel talk
yep,
with an author I ever was a part of. And yeah, I think you're the first author like I ever went live with on any live show. And so it's kind of nice to kind of come full circle with the release of the Dark Heart of Redemption, which has been a labor of love for the last 4 years for you.
yep, yeah, and for me too, the Howdy Partner Book Club was a really cool thing because a lot of authors that say, "Hey, I want to be a top seller. I want them to make my books into movies." And I was thinking, what would I really love? I would love a book club to pick up The Engineer and read it, and then talk to me about it. And I didn't try to get that to happen. I just wanted to see if it was like a dream of mine. Hey, that would be really cool if that happened. And Raoul found The Engineer somehow, and just decided to do that. And I was like, wow, that's really an incredible thing. And it was such a fun experience. And then he was kind enough to have me on his channel with all of you guys and really talk about it. And it was really neat to just discuss writing, because writing is such a solitary endeavor. Like you just said, 4 years I spent writing Dark Heart of Redemption, and I couldn't share it with anybody. Even my wife, who is my top critic, and she's my editor, and she does a phenomenal job. But I can't show it to her beforehand. It'd be like, hey, I wrote this really cool scene, because I'll spoil her entire impression of the book if she knows what's to come. So it's so solitary. So to actually sit down and then discuss all of the details and what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to see next time, that was to me such a rewarding process. So thank
I
you.
didn't know that your wife was your editor.
Yep.
So do you do like beta reads? Do you do like a line editor or anything like that, or is that all your wife?
So I do a lot of the editing myself. I learned a lot from her, but she is my main editor, and she is a really great editor. She edits a couple of other journals as well. Um, and she'll give me feedback on scenes, on continuity. She'll tell me sometimes I could tell you drank too much whiskey when you wrote this scene. Rewrite the whole thing. You know, and, and you said it was going to be awesome, but it was terrible. Rewrite the whole thing, which which is a lot of fun. So like, she won't hold back, and that's one of the things I love about her. And as a human being, I've grown a lot from that relationship, but also as an author, because she won't just look at it and go, "Oh, it's your book. I like it." She'll, "I hate this part. You got to rewrite it," or I didn't like this thing about it. But then she's also very good at grammar, spelling, sentence construction. So as a writer, I've learned a lot from her on that, where to
That's
place
awesome.
commas properly, things like that.
I couldn't use the comma properly to save my life.
Yeah. When I started writing, I was terrible with it, and now under her tutelage, I think I'm actually very good, which
Okay.
it's a nice
Well,
thing.
before we went live, you did mention that the engineer had been a semifinalist for SPFBO. I don't remember which year you said,
Number
but what was that
4, which
experience like?
I think number 4 was 2018.
Okay. Yeah, because we're on year number 8.
Yep. So I was in Fantasy Faction subgroup um, under I think G.R. Matthews was leading it. So he did a very nice job and really took the time to write at least some positive comments about each book and some negatives. So I was pretty happy with the fact that I ended up getting chosen as a semifinalist, I think, out of 4 other books that year in that group. So that was really nice out of the group of 30 that Fantasy Faction had. So that was pretty exciting, especially as a new author with my debut. I was like, wow, that's a really nice. I was happy with that. And, how did it feel? I guess a little bit of relief that I wasn't chosen as a finalist because
Why?
because my goodness, do some of them just get ripped apart? It's good and bad, right? So I've seen in the years before that, there were some books that the critics were really harsh on. So it's one of those things. It's like, I'll take the semifinalist and I'll step away with that kudos, and maybe in future years I'll end up being a finalist. But so it was good. It was good and very interesting. I met a lot of authors. I think before that, when I started writing, I didn't know any booktubers. I didn't know any reviewers. I didn't know any fellow sci-fi fantasy authors. So that helped me meet a lot of other people on Twitter and in other places to be able to really bounce ideas off of and see what's going on in the science fantasy fiction writing community, which is a lot different than just the writing community, right? Which is
And you're also in that indie niche as well.
Yeah. But that was my first real exposure to real indie reviewers like yourself and, people that I could reach out to. Because I was woefully unprepared for releasing The Engineer. I kind of researched how do you publish and what do you do with publishing? And, I decided to self-publish for a number of reasons. And, but then after that, it was like, well, who do I give the book to read and review it? I don't know anybody. And that's tough.
Well, I mean, lately it feels like, if you go on Twitter and be like, hey, I've got a book. Does anybody want to read it? At least me, I can never stop myself from just going, that's me. I'm a sucker. I've got so many review copies to read right now.
Yep.
I've got like a stack, like you can't even see my hands, but it's just like this big. It's insane. But before we get much further, I just want to clarify, this is going to be a non-spoiler discussion. I should have clarified at the beginning that I got too excited. Yep. So we are not going to be doing any spoilers for The Engineer. I haven't read Dark Heart of Redemption. I have peeked at Dark Heart of Redemption.
Okay.
So I can't do spoilers for that either. So rest assured that you will not be spoiled for a fantastic read.
Yep. And I think one of the important things that I was trying to do, especially given, you had to wait how long for this? 4 years, and I know you kept telling me, when's that next book going to be out? I need it.
You said it was my birthday, and that was back in March.
And I'm so sorry, but here it is. But I think an important part as an author, and an author especially that's been frustrated as a reader with books and fantasy series that have never come out, and you're like, when are you going to finish this? And I don't remember anything from this book to read this book. It was very important to me to make this a standalone. So this is a standalone story. It does pick off right where this one leaves off, but this is a closed loop story that I think you could gain satisfaction from.
Okay.
And then I wanted to write this the same way. And I will say, if you read both of them, your experience, I think, would be enhanced. But I wanted to make sure readers could just say, hey, I'm not really interested in this one. I like the blurb on this one. I can just pick it up. So I tried to write it with that in mind, and I guess reviewers will let me know if I did the job. And also, I got some good advice from Nick Borelli from Out of This World reviews, which was put something at the beginning telling me kind of what happened at the throughout the last book, so I don't have to reread the whole thing.
I was just about to mention, like, that peak I mentioned, I got to like the first couple pages, but I noticed that you had a kind of the story so far section on your book, which a lot of readers are really advocating for these days, because I mean, you're right, sometimes it can be years between releases and we don't always have time to reread an entire series. And especially this book looks thick, but it's actually way longer than it even appears. Your word count was what, in the 250 to 300,000 range for the engineer?
Actually, both books are exactly 225,000 words.
Exactly?
Exactly. Yeah.
How did you pull that off?
It was crazy. I don't know, because with Dark Heart, it was weird. It was a longer book in page count, but it was at 215,000 words, and then after editing, it was 225.
You added an additional 10,000 words.
You remove some stuff, and then other things, like reading it as a standalone, you go back and you go, well, I didn't even describe what this character looked like, or I didn't explain to people what this thing is in the world, so I need to add a little bit in here and there. So you end up taking out and removing it and adding back in at the same time. So in the end, I ended up adding 10,000 words overall.
Wow. So. One of the things that I think is really cool, and I love hearing you talk about this, is the origins of where your story comes from and how it came about. Can you tell the viewers where the origins of the engineer comes from?
Absolutely. So the world of Redemption was actually, I wish I could say I came up with it myself, but I didn't. It was my wife came up with it with her friend Simon Sensen. And it was a game. It was actually a text-based RPG called a mush, or a multi-user shared hallucination. It kind of stemmed from MUDs, which were the predecessors of EverQuest and games like that. But mushes were more role-playing intensive, so they're better for writers and readers. So you actually wrote out paragraphs of what your character was doing. So I'd write, I'd have my character and you'd have your character, and then you would write what your character did, and then I'd write what my character does in response to that. And we go on adventures together, or we fight each other, or whatever, and we come up with a really cool shared story. So Redemption Mush was set in the city of Redemption, and it was mostly around Pyramid. Pyramid was the grid, which is where there were actual coded rooms that the players could wander around in and interact and stuff like that. And really didn't go beyond Pyramid, although I was glad to do so in the book quite a bit. And also in the Dark Heart of Redemption, I got to go beyond Pyramid even more, which was a lot of fun because those aspects of the world weren't really developed. But Stephanie and her friend Simon came up with this game, created it, came up with the backstories and things like that and the theme. And they actually coded the areas. So you could log into this text-based game and you get a feed and create your own character. So I created Actaeon, actually, and your background has to get approved by the administrators and stuff like that. And then you can play as that character in the mush, and you could actually affect the world. So it was always very fun. It was something I've done since I was a kid. I played on these role-playing text-based games online.
I'm assuming you did Zork and all that too?
Yeah. Actually, after I found Zork and those types of single-player ones, after I found Muds and Mushes, which is
Zork was the only text-based one that I had in my house.
You've been eaten by a Gru. That was what happened in Zork. You just always got eaten by the Gru somehow. So I don't think I ever got past that. So yeah, in these text-based games, there were a lot of cool different themes, and I played on a Star Trek one for many years. I played on a Lord of the Rings one before the movies were even out, and all sorts of different settings. So this was an original setting that they came up with, and the two of them actually gave me permission to write my novels in this world, which is really cool because it's no longer around the game. And actually, that's where I met my wife. I made a character on the game, and we role played together, and we became friends. And we eventually met in person and started a relationship. So
I love that
Yep.
specific aspect of your story. Specifically because it kind of, I don't consider this a spoiler, but you took some NPCs and characters from the people that you used to play with and you put them in the book.
yeah,
And I believe your wife is, I'm going to butcher her name. I've got it written here somewhere. Just go ahead and say it. I can never pronounce it.
Cassandra.
Yeah, Sandra. There we go.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that like a lot of the people that you played with, or a lot of the NPCs that you interacted with, like Wave and Trench, were
Yeah.
NPCs, correct? Or were they player characters?
Wave and Trench were my character's NPCs that I created because my character, being an engineer, wasn't particularly great at fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew he needed some sort of protection as he was wandering the ruins of Redemption. And he would logically think to do something like that to get some mercenaries to help him. And also, they just created so much interest in the game because I played them through my character. So they would interact with other characters and stuff like that. And all that banter that they have that people love in the Engineer and hopefully in the Dark Heart of Redemption, they had that in game for a very long time. So I'd really mastered the banter between those two guys for many, many years before I was even writing the Engineer. And people would actually ask on the game, could I have a scene with Trench, or could I have a scene with Wave? I know they're NPCs, but I like them. So,
did any of your like adventures or specific scenarios that you did in the game get translated into the book, or is the book wholly original adventures?
Definitely. So the Engineer is more things that took place in the game, and obviously I had to novelize that, so it needed to have a thread that ran through. So certain things got cut out, certain characters cut out that didn't really matter. Some characters I couldn't get permission to use them in the book, so I wrote different characters for those roles. And I would say a large part of the story, really, and one of the reasons I was so encouraged to finally finish a novel was it was really the story of how I met my wife, and I talk about, I can tell my son years from now, this is how I met your mother,
Yeah,
this is my Ted Mosby story, right?
It's your Ted Mosby
Only
story.
the ending is better. So sorry, How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm small side tangent. I wasn't the biggest fan of the last season of How I Met Your Mother either.
Yeah, I liked the last season, but the ending, which those who watch to the end, we're a spoiler-free zone.
Yeah,
The ending was frustrating for me, so I just pretend that the ending was different. But yeah, so a lot of those scenes that took place in the game took place in this story as well, and I had to rewrite them, obviously, to make them a little bit more concise for a novel format and to make them interconnected and stuff like that. But the whole overarching story in there took place on the grid, if you will. And Dark Heart was a little bit different, and I really enjoy writing it because there were some events that took place. Like there's a siege of Pyramid at the beginning of the book. That took place on the grid. But a lot of the plots that took place in the Dark Heart of Redemption either were unresolved plots or plots that I wanted to see go forward and weren't able to in the game, or just completely original creations. So I got to really explore and craft a novel by myself without looking back at things that took place in game, which was a lot of fun.
And Dark Heart comes out September 17th, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I believe I'll make sure, but I do have your author page, your author Amazon page linked in the description down below if people want to go there and pre-order the Dark Heart of Redemption. I am personally holding out for the paperback copies because it has to match my Engineer because I have to have it on my shelf. But there was something you wanted to ask me live prior to going live, and it is about my initial reaction to the Engineer.
Yeah, so that was such an interesting thing that I thought, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it. But you when we did the initial Howdy Partner book club discussion, I remember Raoul telling me, just so you know, some of them didn't like your book. They didn't really like it that much. So just be prepared. You're going to get some criticism. And I was like, okay, as long as they gave it a fair shot, I appreciate that they read it, no problem. And I would say during our discussion, all your comments were very fair about the book. I really didn't disagree with anything. I think some of the points that you pointed out, I was like, okay, I could definitely see some people might like this, some people might not. It was interesting. And I didn't get the impression that you didn't like it, by the way. But you were certainly more critical of it. And then the interesting thing was, as the months and years progressed after that initial discussion, you were the person that was the most calling for me to finish this.
Yes.
I need this right now. I need to know what happens to all these characters. And that to me was so flattering, because I was like, wow, that maybe he didn't get an initial good first impression, but this story stayed with him. And that was very cool for me to see.
Yeah, so my experience with The Engineer is I remember picking it up, and there's like opening scenes where we're with Actaeon, and like there's mysteries being involved or given to the reader, and I was like really engaged, and I was prepared for an epic sci-fi read, which is my fault, because honestly, I went in with expectations that were never given to me. And so when you read with expectation, if a book doesn't meet that expectation, it can be a little jarring. And I remember messaging Raul just being like, I don't get this, and I wasn't prepared for this. And I did the same thing with my buddy Nico, and he's just like, if you're not enjoying it, I was like, no. The characters are engaging, and the world is creative. I just don't understand. And at that point, like, I wasn't really reading a lot of romance. And there is a romance subplot within The Engineer. And it's a very heartfelt romance subplot, and it takes its time. And a lot of times, if there's action, it'll slow way down. And if you're not prepared for that, it can be a bit jarring. But the more I sat with the book, like after I finished it, because after you get to a certain part, you're in it. I mean, like you said, 225,000 words.
Yeah.
Once you've read it, you're in. And you get to a certain part of the book, and you're just like, well, I can't put it down now. And then when I finished it, I'm sitting there and I'm trying to be critical, and I've had my preconceptions, and then we do our live show, and then I keep thinking about it, and I'm like, man, that part was so cool, and man, I really enjoyed that banter, and that was really creative, and man, their relationship worked so well. And then as I explored kind of my own relationship, I'm a married man with 2 kids, and I just keep sitting back and thinking, I'm like, you know what, that was a really healthy take on relationships and pursuing love. And I'm just like, you know what? Why was I mad about it? And so then when I realized you were getting closer to the Dark Heart of Redemption, I got really excited. And I was like, you know what? I do want to come back to this. And quite literally, when you provided me, I've got an e-arc. When you provided me that e-arc, I started flipping through it, and I got 3 pages in it, and I said, I have to stop, or I'm throwing everything out to read this book. And so at that point, I had to hit the brakes, and I was like, no, you need to schedule it. I know it's going to be a beefy book. I know it's going to take me a while, and I need to give it the proper attention with the correct expectations this time, because it's one of my most anticipated reads in a long time. So that's kind of how that whole thing just kind of went down for me personally as a reader.
And that's so flattering to hear from me. So I really do appreciate that. And by the way, it's kind of funny that you talk about the progression of a romance and what's realistic and stuff like that. And it's funny because my wife and I say the same thing, because we'll watch a show and just a male and a female protagonist happen to bump into each other or come a little bit too close, and then they're having sex. And it's just like, just skip everything, And to me, that's not, I'm sure it's realistic to certain people. So some people are going to do that, I guess. But for me, I could never relate to that. So it was really cool to be able to highlight a relationship with 2 people that didn't have that type of experience. They had to build a friendship, a true friendship first, as they developed their relationship. And that was a lot of fun. And also, to get it out of, I think a lot of relationships and a lot of fiction writers like to build suspense with, especially in romance. Is this person going to cheat on this other person? Or I'll introduce another potential love interest, and who are they going to pick? And I didn't want that. It's just, there can be drama in two people falling in love and taking their time to develop a friendship. And that was one thing I was, looking back at The Engineer, I was proud to be able to show it that way.
Yes. So I will say it is a sci-fi fantasy. I always sell the book as sci-fi fantasy romance because there is that very strong through line. It's not like romance. They're not like, wind blowing in the air with the shirt ripped open. It's not that. It's just very much two individuals coming together, building a relationship, building a friendship, and then, taking things slowly.
Yeah, and as far as screen time in the story, I think the romance is not the center to be concentrated on, but I would say it's probably the center thread of the story that takes it in the direction that it will eventually go in.
So Raul right here is pushing the physical experience. And because I've got mine right here, I will say physically, this book is awesome. Between the parts, you've got these great kind of pages and like sections. The paragraph breaks are I don't know if I can get in on that, on this little hook, which Actaeon carries around. It's kind of his tool that he uses.
Halberd.
His halberd when he uses exploring. Oh, I guess that is a halberd, isn't it? I'm silly. It's a fantastic physical experience, and I absolutely do agree that this is a beautiful book that should be read physically. Yes.
This, by the way, I want to highlight this. This actually was drawn by my wife.
That's drawn by your wife?
Yeah. So she sketched that and had it in the first book.
So that kind of leads into something else that I want to talk about. And that's the art around your books. And specifically, like I remember it was some months ago, someone provided you with like a physical artwork of Actaeon, which touched you very deeply. Yes, you've included it. I remember seeing that on Twitter. Oh, so it's in Dark Heart. You're going to make me buy that book.
Actually, it's next to a poem that my wife wrote. So.
Again, see, y'all kill me. Anyway, too cute. So, talk to me about the art and how the art kind of like speaks to you and the covers. I know you mentioned earlier that there's a scene that you really love, and in fact, I think it's in the bottom corner of the screen that identifies you with like Dark Heart of Redemption. So, how does the art around the period and your book covers speak to you as an author?
So, I've had a pleasure of working with a really talented artist that's really been able to capture my visions with these books. And one of my favorite covers is the character looking out on a very interesting landscape, whether it be fantasy or sci-fi, or in this case, somewhere in between, post-apocalyptic sci-fi fantasy. So I envisioned in the first scene of this, Actaeon emerges kind of from the ruins, and it's the first time he's seen Pyramid in a very long time. He was there earlier in his life, but he hadn't been there in a while. So he emerges from the ruins and sees Pyramid at first, and his whole life is about to change. So he's kind of at the precipice of this change in his life, and I wanted to capture that and really get the full, what does redemption look like, and what is he walking into, and to be able to convey to a reader what kind of story are you going to get involved in, what kind of setting. And the artist is this guy, Marcin Rubenkoski, who at the time I just saw his digital art, and I liked a couple drawings he did. And some of them were pretty dark, but, he did a couple really colorful ones with like this cover. Mm-hmm. And I really love them. And so I said, well, can you do me something? Can you make me something for my book that's very colorful? Because it really drew my eye, and I think he did a fantastic job. And then as I was working with him, and after I released the first one, I found out he was the artist, the concept artist for Destiny 2.
Okay.
He ended up being the concept artist for Love, Death, and Robots. So all this famous stuff that he was working on. And I think he's working on some other famous things, now. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it, but, if you follow Marcin Rubenkoski, you'll be able to see some things like that. And one thing that I would say is phenomenal about him is he took the vision that I had for the front cover, that I could kind of picture the layout of it in my head.
Mhm.
And I could show him, oh, okay, this is roughly what I imagine. And then this is, I actually drew an arrow on the map. This is the direction he's looking at, and I think he actually took some buildings and things like that and incorporated them into the cover. And I was really impressed with just how it came together. And it was like I was there. And the more interesting thing was, I talked to, obviously my wife was somewhat involved in the process for both of these books, but I talked to her friend Simon, who was a co-creator of the game, and he was like, wow, that's redemption, and so he wasn't involved in, I talked to him a bit, but he wasn't involved in the writing or the editing or any of the process of the book. And he was like, wow, the artist hit this on the head. This is exactly what it looks like in my head. So that was really cool to see. And then this was a bit fun to be able to put together. And I'm sorry, this one says not for resale across it, which isn't great. But this is Travail, which is the Loresworn building, which you could see in the background there on the image. And actually, we could see it right on the video here. But that's Actaeon and Lysandra standing on the bow of the Glorious Redemption, which is a Therian ship. And the reason that they're there, you'll have to read to find out. And you can see some crazy battling going on. And for some reason,
you
the
see like
ship is
little
on.
laser bolts and everything going on. But like,
Yep.
If I remember the tweet, you said that specifically like those two looking out at this building filled you with some sort of sense of humanity, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with it. I write a lot of tough scenes in the Dark Heart of Redemption, and a lot of it has to do with, and I drew a lot out of my experience as a firefighter. Some of my biggest heroes are people that I actually have known that have, in the face of hopelessness, decided to carry on and continue forward, even though that they knew what they were walking into might bring certain death. One person I'll call out specifically is Lieutenant Pete Martin, who was one of my neighbors, who, even after the second tower fell, he was an FDNY firefighter in Rescue 2. Even after the second tower fell, kept walking up the stairs to the tower because he knew he had to go up there and try to put the fire out, even though the building he was in was probably going to come down. And he did pass away during that. So, it embodies a bit of that attitude where these characters, and they're walking into situations where they don't know that they're going to make it out alive. They don't know what's going to happen to them. And they do that on several different occasions in the Dark Heart of Redemption. I would say putting themselves at even more risk than they did in the Engineer in different scenes. And that's really interesting to explore. And I think also part of my process of, dealing with all the different loss and also trying to, in my own way, honor those people that gave everything, right, in the face of darkness, because those are the people that give me hope in the world. We live in a difficult time. We just came through more or less a pandemic that, affected a lot of people and killed a lot of people. And there's a lot of darkness on the news and in our politics and in a lot of different things. But it gives me hope and it heartens me that there are people like that are willing to, in the face of darkness, show that level of heart and compassion and bravery, right? And they're all around us. There are people like that everywhere. And it was, I would say, an honor to try to embody that in the characters,
Okay.
So,
Well, that was a much deeper answer than I was ever expecting. So you just knocked my socks off. Speaking of like hard scenes to write within the Dark Heart of Redemption, I know specifically in the Engineer, it has a very good through line, but at the same time, it feels kind of episodic. Like we're resolving like an issue, and then it's like a staggering pyramid almost of getting to the culminating, I guess I would say, climax of the story.
that's right.
Do you have a similar structure in Dark Heart?
So when I wrote the Engineer, I wanted it to be more. I wanted to be, obviously, I knew kind of what the through line would be, and I knew where the story would end up because it was a story I was telling for a reason. So I knew where that ending was going. But I wanted to from start to finish show a little bit of slice of life, day in the life of an engineer in his workshop. He's working on this, he's working on that. Not everything is necessarily related, but then I also wanted to show how everything could be interrelated, because I see that as an engineer too, where, I've come up with ideas as an engineer to solve problems for myself in the fire service. Or I've come up with one design that doesn't work, and it breaks for one thing, but when I look at a different problem, I'm like, wow, that's the design that will work perfect for this. So you see a little bit of that with Actaeon, not necessarily succeeding in everything he does, but always gaining a little bit of experience and maybe a little bit for his arsenal later on. And you'll see sometimes, I guess you talk about, is it the MacGuffin in Shakespeare? Where the character's just like, well, I needed a bow for this, so I just happened to find one right here, Or actually, in a sci-fi series I saw on TV recently, the guy just happened to have a sniper rifle buried under the grass in a location where he needed it. But we didn't learn about that until that moment, and that seems very contrived. So I wanted to show how a lot of the stuff, like the Granados are a good example, and I think that doesn't really give a spoiler away. But the Granados are something that Actaeon spends a lot of time developing and eventually comes into play. And they're not just something he pulls out and uses, and he's like, I've got it. It's something that you saw the grueling work that went into it. And that was a lot of fun to put in the engineer. So, and some people love it and they say it's great. And other people are like, the pacing sucks there. And I can't disagree with them. It turns into kind of a slice of life novel. And if you don't like that type of thing,
see, I'm a Stephen King fan. I love slice of life.
Yeah. He's very good at that.
Yeah, very good at that.
So that was the engineer. With the Dark Card, I took a lot of feedback from readers where the pacing was a problem. And I don't think I needed to show that at the same level. So it is much more of a through line where there's a pressing matter that drives them from one point to the next. And there are some engineering projects that get to take place, which I think the people that really enjoyed that will like to revisit that.
Okay. All right. Now, one thing I should have mentioned earlier, and I remember talking about this in our last discussion, is I believe you said one of your wife's favorite shows was Stargate Atlantis. And specifically, I remember commenting that while I was reading The Engineer and I was in Redemption, it felt very much like discovering a city of the ancients, almost like in Stargate Atlantis. Do you want to expound on those thoughts? Is there anything you would like to add?
So yeah, I could add a little bit. I don't think there's too much I can talk about because basically, I've watched Stargate. I watched the one Universe with them on the ship, and there's some similarities.
That's the one I didn't watch.
That was really good. I enjoyed that. My wife actually told me don't watch Atlantis because the characters and the plot are terrible, but the world was so interesting to her. And
I think the first 3 seasons of Atlantis are golden, and then they started playing with the format too much, and it got messy.
Maybe I should watch that then. But from what she told me that was a major inspiration to the development of Redemption as a setting, to have a world full of ruins where the people are gone, and you don't know what happened to them, and there's very advanced technology left behind that could, if you use it wrong, easily kill you or do a number of weird things, which you see in The Engineer and the Dark Heart of Redemption, right? So actually in The Engineer, there's one scene that I recall that they use some sort of pyramid system as a bathhouse because there's like steam baths, and that's probably not what it was for, but they're using it anyway, and at some point something goes wrong with it.
And it causes all sorts of issues.
Yep. So there's a lot of issues with that. So that's where the Atlantis influence came from. So that was from my wife in the original creation. I will say since then, I didn't actually realize I was writing in a type of genre that existed already that I hadn't heard of until a bunch of readers pointed me towards it, which is Dying Earth. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you ever heard of the Dying Earth series by Jack Vance.
I've heard of it.
So I've read some of them. He has a collection of short stories in Dying Earth, and they're very similar, like very advanced technology. Characters don't know what it does, and they treat it like magic. And you could kind of, as somebody that's more technologically savvy, look and go, hey, that's not magic, that's this. And another book that, if people like The Engineer, was pointed out to me, and I loved it. I read it after I wrote my book, Non-Stop by Brian Aldiss.
Okay.
Excellent. And I don't even want to say anything else, because just it's a treat to discover it on your own without me telling you anything. And we're in a non-spoiler
right now.
We're in a non-spoiler episode, right? So we can't spoil it.
I'm writing that down right now. All right. Well, excuse me. That is definitely, okay. So one of the cool things about The Engineer is going off of kind of the whole exploration of like dead civilizations and things like that. One of the things I loved about it was the exploration, because we don't just sit with a guy who is an engineer and like make inventions. He goes out and he looks for lost technology, or he explores the ruins. He maybe goes a little further out of bounds than he's supposed to. He has to hire mercenaries. He has to hire protection. He kind of steps on some political toes. I mean, we've got all sorts of kind of things that I think readers will really enjoy about the Tales of Actaeon. What kind of drives that sense of exploration in your main character?
I think a lot of myself. I've always liked exploring. I think one of the reasons I originally started as a mechanical engineer that did mechanical design, and I eventually segued into R&D because I want to do a little bit of everything. So now I do a little bit of optical. I do a little bit of software brainstorming and stuff like that, a little bit of electrical, and obviously my bread and butter mechanical. So I like to expand into different places myself. And I've loved going on adventures and exploring, on road trips around the United States and different places. So it's one thing that I really enjoy. The world doesn't have as many places. Our world, we're so discovered that we don't have as many places to truly explore. But one of my favorite things to do is to go on hikes and see abandoned places and, go somewhere where I don't know what's right ahead. And I think that's the appeal of the road trip, right? Mm-hmm. Is you don't know what is, as you're driving down the road, you know where you're going, but what's in between? Am I going to find something interesting, someplace interesting to stop? I think, yes, Raul, definitely.
Oh, it looks like we have a consensus, Raul. It's time to resurrect. Bring forth from the ashes.
Yep, bring it back. We're coming out of retirement. So yeah, as far as that unknown, it's just so fascinating to me to explore. And that's what I like the most about reading fantasy and sci-fi is you're looking at the unknown. And with other fiction, it's great, but you're writing an interesting story in the known. And that's why it doesn't hook me as much, I guess, because you're not exploring that unknown. You're not discovering some new place that you're totally unfamiliar with, right? So I love doing that. And I will say, if you liked those aspects in The Engineer, like at one point Actaeon journeys to the Sun Tower, and he gets to play with some lenses. I don't know if you remember that part. So
a little hazy.
Yeah.
I've only read about 200 books since then.
Yep. So, but to explore all these kind of different places throughout Redemption was very interesting, and they really weren't fleshed out. So I got to really flesh them out and turn them into real places that I was able to make even stranger than the initial descriptions of in these books and in The Dark Heart of Redemption, especially. And I think you'll find when you read it, Travail is one of the first place Actaeon actually, he's leading for reasons. He's leading a military force, which doesn't make any sense for an engineer, and it's kind of a cool thing, and that gets me into a different subject, which I could talk about for a little bit.
We'll talk spoilers here in about 6 minutes.
Yeah, which is fish out of the water. But one of the first things he does is he brings that group to Travail because he wants to look to see, is there anything cool that I can use there to break this siege? So he's thinking like an engineer, right? And Travail is just a weird place. So you get to really explore the inside of that, and it's weirder than Pyramid and really any other place. There's other places too that you get to explore, the Underforest, and there's a place in the Underforest called Temple,
Okay.
and they get to explore there, and that gets really strange. So being able to see all those different places was really a cool reward in the Dark Art of Redemption, because I no longer was confined to a story that took place on a grid. I was now able to explore the wider world. And actually, I have plans to go even beyond Redemption.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
How many? Now it's been a while since I've asked you this question. How many books do you have planned within this world?
I got to stop thinking.
Last time I heard it was like 3 or 4.
I got to stop. I got to stop thinking about it because, yeah, it was 3, and then a prequel with Trench and Wave.
Right.
In addition to that, and now I have maybe 2 more. And I took a break from novel writing, and I'm writing just short stories in the world.
Okay.
Which allow me to, I guess it lends to that exploration. I can now take a slice of the world and really explore it without being constrained to a story, a broader story, right? Now I can just say, I want a story that's going to explore this area, and I can write a short story there.
So you're going to do a compilation that is 225,000 words of just short stories.
With a bunch of short stories. That's the hope, I think. And I have a few short stories written, actually. And one of them's published.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll have to go and check that one out. Yeah. I was speaking themes earlier, and I'm being so airheaded. One of the things that I remember about reading The Engineer is there are little spikes of little horrific moments, specifically in alien monsters and things like that. Like truly terrifying monsters that just pop up out of nowhere. And if a reader isn't ready for it, like you can be like, oh yeah, we're exploring some ruins. There might be some conspiracies going on. Oh, people are getting eaten.
Yeah. Yeah, some of those monsters are pretty brutal.
Do you have more monsters to introduce within the Dark Art of Redemption?
Yeah, a few more, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised if you like those monsters. Some of them will return. So I think I unfortunately think I get a little more horrifying in the Dark Art of Redemption. You know, some of the stuff that took place is just nuts. So I won't give you any spoilers, but yeah, there are more monsters. The monsters do play a big role in the story. This slug creature that Raul mentions, the giant slug, that was actually the only one I didn't create. The rest of them I created for the game. I actually was the guy creating their bestiary for a while. After I kind of got into the game more, they asked me to invent some weird monsters. So like the Death Crawler, that nightmare was my own creation, which it's actually just a bunch of bugs shoved together and you make it bigger.
That's still terrifying.
Yep. So like house centipedes, wonder how many people watching who has house centipedes. They're pretty terrifying looking, and they could be up to like 2 feet long, these things, and they move frighteningly fast. I've had some in my house, and they can move like 2 feet per second. It's just like insane how fast they can move. And they're these little or sometimes big bugs, and they're freaky looking. They've got a bunch of hairs like as their legs, and the hairs are their legs, and they move really fast. And if you hit them, the legs all fly off, right? So death crawlers are like a giant house centipede, and it's crossed with a cicada killer wasp, which is a giant bee that grabs cicadas out of the air and injects them with a paralytic, brings them back to their burrow, and then lays eggs on them, and then keeps them alive until their young hatch so that the young have fresh food. So that's horrible, right? So that's death crawlers. Horrible.
Speaking of Tommy Bruno, good old T.A. Bruno's in the house.
There he is.
He says you've invented a Midwest hellbeast right there.
Yeah, it is pretty frightening. Even some of the death crawler scenes, like I was writing them in Dark Art of Redemption, and I was like, this is horrifying.
So
have fun with that, and I'm sorry.
What?
I have to say.
So I didn't know that you had like run the bestiary for the game.
Yeah.
What kind of goes in? Do you just say, "Oh, this would be absolutely horrifying," and just mash things together? Like, what goes into creating such a bestiary or terrifying creatures that, like, I would just nope out of that situation? Like, save us! I'd be like, I'm not that
Yep.
brave.
I think part of it is just if you look around, like I love learning about different creatures and the stuff that they do on Earth, and they're like aliens that exist and they live right near us and they do such weird things. You know, I could take things that I find in my backyard and research them, and I'll come up with like I'll find out just weird alien strange things that they do, and it's just shocking. You know, like I found a type of mushroom in my backyard that consumes itself. It digests itself, and then it goes away, and then it comes back, and then it digests itself again. It's very, very just weird stuff that you'd never even have imagined without doing research on it, and it's all around us. So I think part of it is calling attention to that in something that you can't ignore because it's not a little thing that you just walk by. It's something that's going to eat you if you don't pay attention to it. And also something to create more of a challenge for the protagonists. I'm not a single villain guy. A lot of stories have like the big bad guy and
Right.
or girl, and you have to try to defeat them, and they're nefarious. And there are a couple bad characters, but I guess the whole story isn't just about trying to foil bad characters. Sometimes the bad guy can be the environment, like the deadly technology in the ruins. Sometimes it can be these creatures, and sometimes it can be bad people, and sometimes it can be ourselves, right? So I think that plays into kind of real life where we're contending with all sorts of things in our life and not just one bad thing. So creating the bestiary like that was my way of, I guess, giving the players something to contend with.
Okay.
So,
So going from kind of bestiaries to factions, one of the factions that specifically sticks out in my mind, and I don't remember the name of this faction, but once I start talking about them, you'll know who I'm talking about. They're very anti-technology.
yes, the
And
keepers.
yes, the keepers. There we go.
Yep.
And I remember the keeper. Like, how did you come up with the keepers? Like, was it just like a given, or they're like so anti-technology because like all technology is evil? I
Yep.
believe there is like a missing memory for the people in Redemption going back like 80 years. Like nobody has a history past 80
Yep.
years. Does that all tie together?
So the story in Redemption is almost 100 years ago, and I think at the beginning of the Engineer, it's either 85 or 86 years in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of portals were told to have opened, and people walked through them into the city, and they didn't remember where they were from, and they didn't have any understanding of the language of the ancients or the technology that they found themselves surrounded by. But they did have some medieval understanding of technology, how to build medieval level structures, how to forge weapons, things like that. And they found themselves in this broken high-tech city, and they just needed to survive at that point. So they formed a bunch of different factions. In the 86-year history, there had been several major wars, numerous conflicts, and the formation of some factions such as the Keepers, because if you have sufficiently advanced technology that it's indistinguishable from magic, you're going to have people treat that differently. And the Keepers were in the original game, and so were the Loresworn, but they were, I guess, foils for Actaeon in the game too. And I remember Simon, Stephanie approved my application when I first joined the Redemption game, and Simon said, "Well, that's an engineer character. He belongs in the Loresworn." And I was like, "No, he can't go in the Loresworn because the Loresworn take all the technology and knowledge
And they
and they hide it, and they don't share it with anyone because that's their means to gain power. So they don't share truth with anyone." And Actaeon's the polar opposite there, because he thinks you're taking all that and you're keeping it for your own power play, but this could help people. This could help people in our society thrive and survive. And that's what he wants to do. So he doesn't like them at all. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust their motivations. So that's the lore sworn. They probably understand a lot of the technology in some cases better than he does. And you see that a little bit in the Dark Heart of Redemption. But he wants to use it for the greater good, and they want to use it for me, you know. And then as far as the Keepers go, the Keepers are like the opposite of the lore sworn, but they're also foils for Actaeon because they want to destroy the technology because they have a god named the All-Father, and the All-Father tells them that the technology led to the Ancients' demise, and if you don't destroy it, it will lead to your demise too. So what they try to do is forcibly take technology away from people and destroy it. And obviously they have to not piss off all the other factions and dominions while they're doing this. So Actaeon is a particular target because he's not in Raydell. He's left Raydell for Pyramid, and he's carrying all these artifacts around. And Raydell doesn't particularly value that. You know, they're more of a semi-tribal society. So he was a weirdo. He's like an eccentric weirdo, and he grew up in this tribal society, you know, coming up with all these weird inventions. So he didn't really fit in there. So now that he's out kind of on his own, the Keepers are like, hey, that guy, he's a man with no country. We're going to take his stuff and we're going to break it. We're going to rough him up. So actually one of the first scenes you get to read in The Engineer are Trench and Wave coming to his rescue when a bunch of Keepers try to rough him up in the end. So, which is a lot of fun. So, and there's one character in particular in the Keepers named Atrina, who ends up working with Actaeon. She's a Keeper knight, and so she's got full plate armor, wields a sword. She's there.
I forgot about her, and that just came flooding all back.
She's there to break your artifact and beat Actaeon up. But at one point in The Engineer, she comes and she goes, can you help me with this? And she has a good reason for it, which I won't spoil. But she's a very interesting exploration because the two of them have a lot of philosophical discussions about it, right?
Yeah, they have a very almost antagonistic relationship. Like, they're not enemies, though. But at the same time, she does not trust him.
Yep.
And I completely forgot about that character. And it just... I now remember a specific scene that's just like smacked me in the face.
Yep.
Oh, that's so cool because like that just brought back like a whole bunch of the story to me.
And actually, she does something towards the end, not towards the end, but maybe the middle of The Engineer that really pisses off Actaeon and his friends. And it was interesting because I like taking people that don't like each other and forcing them to work together. It just creates such an interesting dynamic. Atrina in the Dark Heart of Redemption has to work with Actaeon again, and she's actually forced to because of the siege situation. So, and you'll see how that plays out.
All right. Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground. Let's move into a little bit of Engineer spoilers. I'm going to go ahead and throw up a banner. Before we do that, though, you know, if you're watching this live or on the replay, the Dark Heart of Redemption comes out September 17th, but The Engineer is available now. So, yes, you can read them each as a standalone, but why would you want to? You could read 2 books and have double the fun. So I will have that linked in the description down below where you can either go and buy the ebooks, buy physical copies, and I believe you have hardcovers now as well.
Yeah, so Ingram is a frustrating company to work for or with. But anyway, I set up a pre-order release for hardcovers for $9.17 on Ingram. They were supposed to push that to Amazon. It is on Amazon. It says out of stock. So maybe don't order it from there yet. But Barnes & Noble, I saw, and probably a number of other vendors like them, it is available there. So if you wanted to pre-order the hardback, it is there. And by the way, if you were waiting for the paperback, I'm going to try to release it as close to 9/17 as I can. There's just no good mechanism for pre-ordering paperbacks that doesn't kind of mess up the listing on Amazon eventually. which I hate to have to, I guess, prioritize Amazon, but they are where I sell most of my books through. So
Fair enough. Well, your books are also available, I believe, on Silverstone Books as
yes,
well.
yep, and I think Silverstone's pre-order. They can pre-order my hardcover through Ingram Spark, so I think they can get that, and I'm sure they could take the pre-order for maybe the paperback too when that comes out. Since it's going to be releasing not too far away from that.
I will add Silverstone's Twitter handle because you can access the shop through the Twitter.
Yep.
That's how I do it.
And they're a great indie bookstore, so support
absolutely.
the indie bookstores.
I just placed my first order through them here recently, so I will probably be also upgrading my copy of The Engineer to a hardcover. I don't know. Maybe I'll do paperback. I'm still very undecided.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's start talking some spoilers that I can remember from The Engineer.
Yep.
And specifically, like, I don't remember full, spoiler details, but I do remember, like, are they the crosshatch, like, people? Like, they've got the crosshatch faces.
The cross-face raiders, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's a horizontal and vertical line painted or tattooed across their face.
I remember them jumping Actaeon at the beginning of The Engineer, setting up this great mystery,
Yes.
and then they continue to plague him throughout the rest of the story.
Yep.
They, come after him in the ruins. They come after him in Isandra when they're trying to have moments together, and
Yep.
it's just my dog is right here, and she's pushing on me. But yeah, so where did they come from?
The crossface raiders, actually, it was funny because that ticked off a lot of the staffers on the game. I just kind of came up with this group of people called the crossface raiders when I was playing Actaeon on the mush, and they were just constantly attacking Actaeon out of the blue, and he'd be hanging out with characters, and all of a sudden these guys would show up and they'd be in a battle. And I had a whole thread there that I wanted to take that, and it wasn't well liked at the time, I guess. It was, I guess, it was almost a faction that I had created of NPCs without any approvals. So I had mixed reactions from it, which was interesting. But people started getting more interested in them because I had them not. They weren't saying anything. You could cleave one in half, and they wouldn't even shout out in pain. So there was weird stuff going on with them. How were they talking? Why didn't they talk? Why were they killing themselves before you could interrogate them? There were all sorts of strange things like that. And why were they pursuing this one guy relentlessly across the ruins? And actually, the Engineer starts with cross-face raiders chasing Actaeon across the ruins.
And he's just mouthing off to him.
Yeah, well, they capture him in the beginning, and he's just you could kind of get a view of his defiance and also a little bit of his sense of humor as he's just cracking jokes as they're kicking him in the back and stuff, right? But then, even though he fights back, it's interesting in that scene because none of them really does anything that will kill him. And
aren't they trying to like capture him and brainwash him?
They're doing something with him. And he doesn't understand why. He does have, I think, a couple inklings, and I think you find out a little bit more towards the end of the Engineer. I don't know if you want me to get that far into.
Oh, we can do full spoilers. If I've got a spoiler snag up, anything
okay.
goes.
So towards the end of the Engineer, Markor is some guy that Actaeon knew when he was a kid, and the Crossface Raiders capture Lauren, who, as I recall, isn't she one of your characters that you like?
Oh God, I don't remember. Maybe.
So Lauren was basically she was a wood carver from Raydell, and
Actaeon, yes. That was one of my favorites.
Yep, Actaeon finds her in the marketplace, and
she's the one who made the door.
Yep. She makes a lot of intricate wood things. He needs her for some project because she's really good at what she does, and he hires her, and she's pretty interested in the engineering aspect, so she becomes kind of his apprentice, if you will. And she's fun too because in Dark Heart of Redemption she really comes into her own, which is pretty cool. So it explores that mentor apprentice type relationship quite a bit. But toward the end of the Engineer, she is captured by the Crossface Raiders, and Actaeon has to go and I think somebody is returned from the Crossface Raiders to let him know, or a note, I forget exactly how it's done, is sent back saying he is to meet the Crossface Raiders in a certain place if they want to see Lauren back alive. And he goes out there and does it. So he goes out there and he tells his mercenary friends to stay behind because he knows they're not going to be tolerated there. And they end up, Actaeon and Lauren end up both being captured by the Crossface Raiders, by a guy named Markor, who's this crazy guy that Actaeon had met during his first time in the pyramid before the story takes place. And Markor wanted him to look at some sort of strange device that Actaeon wanted nothing to do with because he could tell it was very dangerous and he didn't trust this guy's motivations. So turns out Markor is working for this guy called the Veiled One, or this mysterious entity or individual called the Veiled One that we don't get to see on the pages of the Engineer. They keep mentioning it. And Actaeon and Lauren eventually have to escape from the Crossface Raiders kind of base, or one of their bases, and get away. And they end up MacGyvering a solution, remember, out of this guy Markor's tendency to kind of slam the door shut really hard. So Actaeon gets all of the supplies together to rebuild kind of a explosive device using what he knows about granados, so that when this guy slams the door shut, it blows him up. Right?
It's a massive explosion too.
Yep. So they end up escaping, and remember they escape into the fog.
I remember they escape into the fog, and then the Veiled One's not gone though. That's still very much an ongoing plot line.
Yep.
Because they take somebody with them who is then corrupted.
Yeah, they took this woman with them who disappears at the beginning of the story, Lady Lardigan. I forget what her first name is. And she is clearly, something's up with her, but there's something going on where her mind's being controlled, so it's a little strange. And in the end, she ends up taking Lauren hostage as they're escaping into the Felmir, and they're in a deep fog in the Felmir. She's got a dagger or something to Lauren's throat, and Actaeon has to kill her or rescue Lauren in that situation. But she asks for Actaeon's notes on the device, which he was being forced to study while he's in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and she sees it, and Actaeon suspects after that this device has been activated. And I don't know if you remember, there's a scene later on in the Engineer where a giant blue sphere appears.
I vaguely recall.
And the whole earth shudders, and they all fall down on the Avenue of Glass. And he's with different people at that point. So Actaeon suspects that Lady Lardigan somehow communicated before she was killed in the Felmir, communicated this back to the Veiled One. So he starts to suspect, okay, all these people, maybe they're being controlled by whatever this Veiled One is. And that certainly is a major thing that goes on in the Dark Heart of Redemption. That thread actually gets completely resolved.
Cool.
For better or worse.
I can look forward to that.
Yep. So yeah, that was set up very well in the Engineer to continue on, and then I think the characters ended up going in a direction that took them away from that. So they had more of a pressing matter with Cassandra and her family, as you might recall. So,
one of my favorite scenes, if I remember correctly, is it's the lower market, where they have to basically, Actaeon needs to get some clout. He needs to do a job in order to basically be granted enough land to build his shop.
Yep.
And so he goes to the royals, and they don't really want anything to do with him.
Yep.
And he's got an in through Cassandra, who is the one of the princesses, but she's gone and joined the Arbiters.
Yeah.
So she's not supposed to marry. She's not supposed to have relationships. She's supposed to be very unattached. She's kind of given up her whole royal seat, which we then, through the course of the book.
And do you remember why with that?
Because she has, it's a condition. She has a condition.
She's lost.
And it's one of the things, she's one of the lost, which For me, I should have mentioned this in the non-spoiler section. Is I feel like the engineer has great, almost autism representation.
Yep, yep.
And I remember talking about that in our first discussion. But basically, she's one of the lost, and the lost are usually either like left out, or they're not part of society. But because she's royalty, she's saved.
Yeah, yeah.
But they want nothing to do with him.
Yep,
And so they're just like, you know what, like the sewers or something are backed up in the lower market, and everybody's starting to complain, and we don't
yep,
really have time to deal with this. And here's a task, go away.
yep.
And then it leads to just we take Wave and Trench, we kill off a baker's boy, and we meet. Is that where we meet both the slug monster and the Deathwalkers?
Just the slug was there, and actually, the slug monster and what happens at the end of that scene
Uh-huh.
is it kind of changes the whole ecosystem of the market tunnels. And that giant slug was what kept the death crawler population in check.
That's right.
And
That's
then the
right.
crawlers started to be more dominant in there.
Yeah, and that became an issue that they then have to start resolving. But man, like you want to talk about like I had so much anxiety reading that scene because
Yep.
is it Trench's eye who got plucked out?
That
Or
was
it
Wave. Yeah.
Wave's eye got plucked out.
Wave got hit by a tiny slug because remember, it was a big slug with massive teeth that spat smaller slugs with smaller teeth at itself,
Oh my
at its
gosh.
enemies. And one of them latched onto Wave's eye, and he grabs it and rips it off his face, and it takes his eye with it. And that was like right at the beginning of the story. So this actually happened in the game. It was pretty
Oh,
funny.
did it?
Yeah. So that whole.
And then I remember he keeps giving Actaeon grief. He's like, "Where's my new eye?"
Yep.
Because
Yep.
he's just like, "You were supposed to build me a new eye."
Yep.
And
Exactly.
it's a whole through line throughout the story of Wave just kind of grumbling that he needs a new eye. Yeah, Raul says it's very vivid.
and actually, Wave. It was unusual for Actaeon to promise something like that because he doesn't. I don't think he knows that he could actually get Wave and I.
Yeah, no, he's just like,
But
yeah,
he was more like, I got to get this guy mentally back, or we're all dead. So yeah, I'll make you another eye. Just keep fighting this thing.
yeah, we'll get through it. Like, I don't know, that was
Yep.
fantastic. And then Trench gets
So that
whole
scene,
cult.
by the way, was one scene that my wife picked out, and she was like, "This scene sucks.
Oh, really?
You drank too much, didn't you, or something like that?"
Did you fight to keep it in?
No. She was like, "I'm sorry, this is terrible. Rewrite the whole thing." And I rewrote that whole scene, and it was way, way better. So that was like one example. And people now are like, well, I loved that. And I really, I drew with that from some of my experiences as a firefighter, actually. The dark tunnel, very similar to being in a dark fire.
Yeah, they never know what's like around the corner, and it's a constant danger. Yeah, no, that comes through very well.
Good.
One thing I have. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, my bad.
Even just the way him finding the kids in there was very similar and drew a lot from my experience. So I hate.
Yeah, you hit the emotional points because we get out of the tunnel and then we have to deal with like we found one of the kids and then you've got the mother in absolute anguish. Whose son didn't come back.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately something that we see stuff like that all too often as firefighters. Things like that. Sometimes we can save people, and other times we can't.
Well, and it adds a sense of realism to the story as well, like you're saying. That mirrors real life because in a lot of stories everybody gets saved.
Yeah.
And you immediately establish stakes of, hey, in this one scene I've killed 2 people. A child doesn't make it back, and I've ripped out one of your favorite characters' eyes. Like nobody is safe except maybe Actaeon. Like it's his story, so he might be safe.
maybe.
Yeah, he's mostly safe. I'm gonna bang him up quite a bit, but he's mostly.
Well, actually, it was funny when I actually and I really brought in that scene quite a bit when I rewrote it. But when that scene was first role played, Wave did lose an eye. and actually an administrator for the game was overseeing the scene. And he was like, really? You just created this NPC character? You're going to lose an eye already? You're going to have him lose an eye? I was like, yeah, it's realistic. So, I decided, he landed on his eye and he pulled his eye out, and it was weird. And that scene, by the way, was pretty funny in the game because the administrator actually made the decision. The guy that was running the scene that was part of the game staff, they threw the luminary at the slug, and the slug grabs it with one of the tendrils and squeezes it.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes the compressive energy surrounded by the slime to release the luminary energy in a very tight environment, which causes the explosion. And that was
then leads to the Grenados.
That was then in that moment that Actaeon, even on the grid, was like, ding, 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 ding. I could invent explosives from that. And actually, in his original background on the game, he had invented explosives, and they were like, yeah, he can't do that. We don't want explosives in our game.
And you were like, too bad, I've got an in now.
Yeah. So my wife heard about this log, from this scene, and she read it, and she was like, did you seriously give him everything he needs to invent explosives? We didn't want that in the game. So that was actually, they started talking to me at that point. They were like, can you create something that prevents the slugs from coming back? And that's when I created the Death Crawlers, because they didn't want Actaeon to have a regular supply of explosives. So he had like a limited supply of Grenados.
Man, that's a fun backstory. So going off of just backstory, was it in the game that Trench gets a cult, or did you make that up?
Oh yeah, that was just me getting so silly with the game. I mean, I did a lot of weird stuff. So I had the whole cult with Firius Richter. Firius was one of my NPCs, and he actually hurt my head to play him a bit. But he was this, old, kind of nutty man. Maybe he started, first steps of dementia setting in. And he sees Actaeon and Trench and Wave return with this statue that they found. And remember, Actaeon thought it was a mechanical man at first.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out it wasn't a mechanical man. It was just this glowing statue that, for some reason, looked like Trench. It looked exactly like Trench, but without his scar.
Well, I have a personal theory that that's going to play into the lost memory somehow, either in the Dark Heart of Redemption or in later. Like, I feel like the lost memory is like the deep lore that is going to slowly be revealed over multiple books. That's my theory. But anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
You'll see. But all that does come back. So the cult, and remember, the cult ends up saving, I think it was Trench, when the Keepers attacked the workshop.
I vaguely remember that, yes.
That was the thing that pissed them off at Atrina. They were like, she must have sent them. After seeing the inside of our workshop, she must have sent them to destroy it. So they start off Dark Heart of Redemption really pissed off at this woman. And, she's she actually, in the beginning of the Dark Heart of Redemption, she's like, I didn't do that, I swear. And they don't know whether to believe her. So, and you'll see how that turns out. But the cult, and the funniest scene for me is Wave takes the artifact that Atrina gave them to study and sticks it in his empty eye socket. And he's seeing something, and we don't know what it is. He's seeing some hallucination or something from this artifact. And
they make him take it back out, and he's just like, fine.
Well, no, at that moment, the Keepers attack the workshop, and it's just Trench and Lauren in the workshop. Actaeon's off doing something. And Trench is like, would you get that damn thing out of your eye? And he's fighting all these knights that are attacking the workshop. And Lauren's throwing, the blue fire that Actaeon made at them and other things. And Trench is actually getting his butt kicked, out of these heavily armored knights. And he's managing to go toe-to-toe with them. And what saves him is the cult. The cult gets pissed off. And they're like, you can't attack that guy. He's our statue. And they attack the Arbiters in such numbers that the Arbiters have to run away. Or not the Arbiters, the Keepers. So
all right. I do remember that.
That was one of my favorite just comical scenes. So
no. My favorite comical scene. My favorite comical scene is when you've got the keepers, and then you've got the what's the other faction?
The Loresworn.
The Loresworn, and they call Actaeon in, and they're all sitting there arguing, and there's this like tiny portal that they've discovered, and basically like the one guy's got like the fake arm, and I remember commenting on this. I thought it was hysterical. Like Actaeon's like, yeah, what you're doing is a bad idea, and they're like, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. We're the Loresworn. We know all about this technology. And Actaeon's like, okay, guys, anchor yourselves. And so then they go and flip the switch, and the guy gets his arm ripped off and then like folded in half.
Yep.
He's just gone. And I was laughing because the guy was so stuck up. Like he was just nose in the air, like, how dare you, you lowly engineer? You don't know the depths of the knowledge that I possess. And then just gets wrecked.
Yep. Yeah, that poor guy. I enjoyed Actaeon's comment at the end. What a loss of a loss of that perfectly good arm, right? But because he wanted to study it, he was like, "That's really interesting," and he just got it sucked through a small portal. But that scene was a really good example of, I guess, arrogance in engineering, and I see that a lot at work, and I try to teach the culture at my company. Otherwise, right? But you see that if you're if you lack humility, or if you're too overconfident in your designs, they're going to come to bite you. In this case, it was fatal for that guy. But yeah, he created this extremely negative pressure zone on one side of the portal, and then he had a high pressure zone behind him, forcing him into it. And I actually found that happen. There's a video which I could send you a link to at some point, or maybe I'll post it under this video, of a crab, and that happening underwater. Somebody accidentally cuts into a low pressure pipe, and the crab is too close to it, and the crab hits that opening and just like folds up and gets sucked into this really small opening. And at first I was like, am I being ridiculous with how this scene plays out? But then I saw that and I was like, okay, no, that could actually happen.
Well, I think I've seen something similar on like, it's a science experiment that like is being done at a high school, outside of course, where they try and crumple a barrel with just nothing but air pressure.
Yep.
And I think it's a similar idea to that, where I think it involves like a fire or something.
Yeah, I used to do that. You can do that, and don't do this at home, kids. I learned this technique in my physics class, and I used to do demos of this at my house during parties and things like that. I would take an empty Coke can, you drink the whole Coke, put a little bit of water in the bottom, then you heat it over the burner until just a lot of steam is coming out now. So the whole thing is filled with steam. Then you take it with tongs and you overturn it in a cold water pot really quickly, and it will change the temperature of that water vapor so quickly that it will crush the can.
Yes, it's something similar to,
So similar thing there. There's a pressure vessel there, and you can crush that with that change of that delta P, right? So it's a delta P injury, and that's what that poor Loresworn guy ends up experiencing. I forget what his name was, but
I don't know. But that scene has stuck with me across 200 books. And then of course we've got the poor prince who gets trapped inside of this impenetrable force field that Actaeon has been called on. And they're like, "Hey, get him out of this thing." He's like, "I don't know this technology." And they're like, "Well, just do your best." And he's just like, "Okay." And poor dude, like, we don't know if he's dead. We don't know if he's disintegrated. We don't know if he's teleported. He's just gone.
Yep.
And so at that point, he was the last prince. And we get to see Asandra basically have to step up and become princess. Which, of course, since we're in the spoiler discussion, we end with an instant marriage where she's just like, you know what? I'm no longer an arbiter. I'm in love with this man. We're at war. Better live every day to the fullest. I'm gonna regret this if I don't do it now. And so she and Actaeon get married.
Yep.
So that all just a string of spoilers.
Yep. And she was even in the game. her character was related to the royal family, but she was lost. She was the youngest. She was never supposed to be in that position. So there were actually a string of events that occurred in the game that made it so that this thing happened to the prince, and then for some reason every other viable candidate was just taken out for a variety of reasons, and she ended up having to do it. And it was
her uncle, at least in the
very
book,
unexpected.
her uncle tries to seize power.
Yeah. Yep.
And it all blows up in his face.
Yep. Arcady. I actually was Arcady in the game too. I played.
You were Arcady. You're a mean man.
I was. Yeah, and I did all that in the game. They when they went to rescue Actaeon with Wave's Waythorn plan in the Blackstone Fortress, and they paralyzed everyone temporarily, Arcady was the one that said, "We'll make this look like they murdered them all," and he had his guys kill them all. You know, and then they blamed Actaeon and Cassandra for it, right, to try to frame them. So yeah, I was not a nice guy when I played Arcady. He was not a very nice person. Yeah, Arcady was an interesting character. So, but he ends up getting foiled, obviously, by Cassandra, which he's not very happy about.
So, what is one of the scenes that is just absolutely pivotal to you within the Engineer?
For the Engineer, absolutely, and it shows who the true hero of the story is, which is not Actaeon, by the way. Is the scene where Actaeon is captured when he's remember, he shoots the arrow to try to prevent the artifact from flashing because he doesn't want Prince Aedwin to disappear. He wants to save the person he loves, brother. And he shoots the arrow, and the energy arcs back along the path of his arrow, and it hits him, and he's rendered unconscious, and he's captured by Arcady and his men. And the most pivotal scene of the Engineer is when Cassandra goes from somebody that can't step out of her routine, and she cannot deal with something that's unplanned. She's learned to be an ordered arbiter her whole life, and this has helped her become somebody that can function despite being lost. And she has to now decide whether to save the person she loves or betray the principles of the order that helped her become the person that she is today. And that is just such a pivotal decision for her. And that happened in game too. And she had to make that decision, and she chooses to go help Actaeon and shatters everything she ever knew about her life to take a chance on this guy. And that to me was just so huge. And it shows in the Engineer, the true hero of the Engineer was Cassandra. It wasn't Actaeon. Not to say he's not a hero at all, but she was really a huge hero. And that just showed that was the pivotal role. She could have at that moment said, "I'm not doing it," and the whole outcome of the Engineer would have been changed. And Dark Heart of Redemption would have been completely different.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, we are approaching an hour and a half. So I think that is a great length to kind of cut this off at. Yep. Again, I want to reiterate that the Dark Heart of Redemption comes out September 17th on hardback and on ebook. So please make sure to get your pre-orders in. And also, again, check the description down below. I will have links to Darran's author page, I should say, on Amazon, where you can get The Engineer, fantastic physical copy with great art, great interior art, and fantastic story elements. Darran, it has been too long since we spoke, and I really appreciate you coming back on and speaking with me. Is there anything else you want to talk about or tell people about either The Engineer or Dark Heart of Redemption before we sign off?
Not too much more. First off, I just want to thank you for having me. We should do this again, talking about general sci-fi stuff and other things. It's
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you so much, and thank you for your support. And I want to thank you and other readers that have pinged me over the years and said, "I'm really looking forward to when this comes out," or "I really loved this book." that is what keeps me going as an author. That's what keeps me writing. That people are reading the stuff that I spend time writing, and these stories that mean a lot to me, and they're meaningful to other people too. That's just so motivating as an author. So people that read and review or just read and reach out, thank you so much. That is absolutely the most motivating factor to me as an author to keep writing and to keep doing this. So
Well, thank you for providing us with very engaging and long but beautifully written stories.
thanks, Andrew.
All right. Well, with that, please make sure to get your pre-orders in, get your copies of The Engineer. That said, guys, till next time, peace out. Stay magical. Bye.